Dobro večer svima i dobrodošli i hvala što ste došli da sa nama zajedno razgovaramo sa Sanjit Paul Chowdhuryjem. I will now speak English. So it's my great privilege that Sanjit Chowdhury is our guest tonight. He is the best-selling co-author of Platform Revolution and author of Reshuffle, his latest books, which received the Thinkers 50 Strategy Award in 2025 for the most impactful idea in the field of strategy. He has advised CEOs at over 40 Fortune 500 companies, as well as leading pre-IPO technology companies. Sanjit is currently Senior Fellow at the University of California, Berkeley, and has shared his insights at some of the world's most influential forums, including the G20 Summit, the World 50 Summit, and the World Economic Forum. And he is tonight on the Kopaonik Business Forum. It's a great pleasure to see you, Sanjit, again. And please explain us why you are not with us tonight.
Thank you, Branislav. It's a real pleasure to see you as well. To all of you, please accept my sincere apologies for not being there today. I have been looking forward to attending the Kopaonik Business Forum for the last several months, ever since I have been invited to it. And on Saturday, I got to the airport, I got into the flight, we left for Belgrade, and then 2 hours later on the flight, we were told that we never left Dubai, that the Iranian airspace has been closed because Iran is at war, and that we have to go back to Dubai because the UAE airspace will also be closed. So we came back, we were still waiting if there was a way to get to Belgrade in some way, but after 16 hours at the airport, it was clear that we could not make it. And so over the last few days, we have been under attack. We have been seeing missiles coming into the air, being intercepted. So the country is under war. Hopefully it's getting better now, but because of that, despite my best efforts, there was no way to make it there. I looked at other ways to, other routes that we could go by, but land, air, everything was closed over the last few days. So again, I really apologize that we're having to do it this way. I've been really looking forward to being there.
Thank you very much. And I'm so sorry that you are not with us, but I'm very happy to see you, that you are okay and that everything is fine with you. So that's at least some benefit that we get. But tonight we will discuss something about what it is and what are you doing in the last years and what did you do with the reshuffle. So we will try to help the audience to understand better what really AI can bring and how you can win with AI. So my first question there, if you don't mind, we will move to that. We tend to think of AI as a tool for automating work or for augmenting human skills, so as a help to us. The core argument of your book, however, is that the power of AI is in supercharging coordination. Can you please expand on that and explain to us what do you mean by that?
Absolutely. When we think about the impact of AI, we often think about it in terms of automation or augmentation, as you mentioned. The problem with thinking about it only in those terms is we think of how value is created in terms of the tasks that we perform. Because we apply AI to a task, AI can actually either do it better than humans, faster than humans, cheaper than humans, or we feel that AI can help humans do it better. But we're still thinking at the level of tasks only. We are thinking at the level of execution. But real value in the economy is not created at the level of executing individual tasks. It is created by coordinating different actors together in new ways to together create value. And we have seen this over the last 15 years, even before the rise of AI. With the rise of the digital economy, we saw that most value in the economy was no longer in execution or in owning of assets. It was more in coordination, in enabling the orchestration, the movement of assets, the ability to bring different actors together. So I'll give you an example of how that worked before AI, if you think about it. Um, in over the last 15 years or so, we've seen new companies like Uber, Airbnb come up, which were essentially called platform companies. That's what I talked about in my previous book before I wrote the book about AI. And all these platform companies, their core idea was to organize resources, assets across different, even across different sectors sometimes, and bring them together to solve customer problems in new ways. Today with AI, we have the ability to do the same thing, but it's actually even more powerful than it was before, because in the past, you needed to sign up to a platform, you needed to provide very clear, um, you need to agree to the standards, you needed to provide very structured information, and only then you could be coordinated by one of these platforms. But today, what AI can do is it can make sense of unstructured information, it can extract structure from unstructured information, and using that, it can coordinate different actors who were previously not coordinated. I'll give you a simple example. It's very early days, but it's not playing out in a, but it has the potential to play out in a very big way. For example, if you're going for a trip, in the past, your travel trip would not be coordinated very well because the hotels would not talk to the airlines would not talk to the tour operators, and all of them would provide different interfaces to book at and different formats in which their information was provided. But today, with large language models, you have the ability to feed them all this unstructured data and create a clear view of your trip. Once you have a clear view, you can help customers make better choices. And eventually, if there's a particular AI assistant, for instance, that starts helping customers make better choices, it can then reorganize all these other players around itself. And so we're seeing very early signs of this happening. There are players in travel already doing this. I'm happy to take other examples from other industries where this is beginning to happen. But really, the power of AI is in taking unstructured information from unorganized domains and making all of them easily understandable to each other and coordinating them on that basis.
Thank you.
Sanjit, nice evening and happy to actually be at least virtually with you on stage after a few years. I was a couple of times reading and investigating on your book, and I believe your view on AI is pretty interesting, and you bring so many examples, and actually you're saying, I believe what all of us are recognizing, that world technology leaders are managing to control their partner system, their ecosystem in an easy way because they define actually how partners need to interact. I would ask you to elaborate a bit on that and maybe then to also share a bit how smaller companies in smaller markets like we are in could actually now, because of AI, overcome that or actually become more active in that space, not only that the big global players do that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, to really understand this idea of coordination, it's important to understand how this has played out in many different ways in the past as well. One of the examples I take in the book is that of the shipping container and the impact it had on Singapore. So today, very often when we look at Singapore's success, we try to understand how a small country like Singapore became so successful because it was really a fishing village 60 to 70 years back. And I spent the last 15 years living in Singapore. And one of the key things I learned while there, while working with the Prime Minister's office there, while just living and talking to the people who had built the country over there, is that what really changed Singapore was identifying a new technology and seeing how it was going to change the way the economy was going to work around that new technology. So it was not about adopting the technology as much as making a bet on the new economic system that would come. I'll give an example of that in terms of how it happened, because that gives us a view on where we are with AI today. So when the shipping container was first invented, before the shipping container, most of the cargo around the world used to go on break bulk cargo. So you would have, barrels and bags of cargo on ships, which would be moved manually on and off the ship. Now, that was done by dock workers who were the humans working at the ports. And so when the shipping container first came, everybody thought the effect of the shipping container would be automation, because now you could have a crane move the cargo on and off the ship because it was a standardized unit of cargo. And so everybody thought the impact on jobs would be that the dock workers' jobs would go away. And they were right. The cranes did automate the port with the shipping container, and the jobs of the dock workers went away. But that was only the first order effect. What really mattered was what happened next when the trucks, trains, and ships agreed to a common standard for the shipping container, that the same box could move on different modes of transport. And because of that, shipping became reliable. The cost of shipping dramatically dropped. And as economists, we know that once the cost of an activity dramatically drops, it starts happening much more often. And the constraint around that activity goes away, the bottleneck goes away. So the entire economic system reorganizes around a new constraint. And that's what happened once the shipping constraint went away, because the container made it very cheap to ship globally. The logic of manufacturing changed. You no longer need to manufacture everything yourself. You no longer need it to be vertically integrated. You could be, you could have a global supply chain. Your suppliers did not need to be close to you, because shipping was now cheap and reliable. You could plug into a global supply chain, and with that, eventually the logic of globalization changed. And so the key point I'm trying to make is Singapore did not win because it had a better port. Singapore won because it saw that the future was about plugging into global supply chains. And in order to do that, it did not just build a port, but built an integrated logistics hub. Now, the reason I'm saying that is with AI, we are today at a very similar place in terms of the future of work and the future of the new economic system of how knowledge work will be managed. Because today, if you look at it, a lot of knowledge work is becoming containerized. What I mean by that is in the past, all of our knowledge work used to live in our heads. We had to train heavily, we had to go to university, and then we had to keep training to keep improving knowledge work. And the cost of accessing knowledge work was very high. You had to hire expensive people and to keep training them. Today, some forms of knowledge work, the cost is collapsing to zero. You can just add a prompt onto ChatGPT or Claude, and you can get a unit of work done. So knowledge work, which was tacit and completely, tied to human skill, has now become modular and containerized, just like the shipping container in a way, which means that work can now be reorganized in new ways. What machines can do, what humans can do, will be fundamentally different. And when such reorganization happens, that's when a new form of coordination of work, a new economic system evolves. So we have to bet, as smaller countries, smaller companies, we need to bet on what that new economic system is going to be and where we can play within that. Now, we have some examples of, how to think about where to bet in that. The first thing is that betting on automation has a very bad history when the overall economic system is being reorganized. This is why I take the example of the shipping container and I don't take the example of manufacturing robots, because when robots were introduced into factories, the manufacturing system did not reorganize. Robots were just applied to tasks. And today, when we think about AI, we keep applying the robot mindset. We think that AI will do what the robot did to factories, AI will do to knowledge work. But that's not really true, because AI modularizes knowledge work. It creates new chunks that can be reorganized. Robots did not do that. They worked around the same division of labor, the same steps, the same value creation logic. And so when this kind of new reorganization happens, the first thing I would say is, especially as a smaller country and small companies, do not bet on automation. Do not try to run faster. That will only help you become commoditized much faster. What is much more important is to bet on where the future of your industry is moving. If knowledge work suddenly becomes cheap, what is the new value going to be in your industry? Because it will no longer be knowledge work. You will have to compete on something else. What is that new value going to be? Which means that even if you're a small company who could not hire expensive resources in the past, you now have the ability to bet somewhere else and create a new business model that was not possible in the past. So that's the second thing I would say. Don't focus on automation as the first thing. The second thing is focus on where the new constraint is going to be as you start seeing your industry transform. And the third thing, I would say, the most important thing is to try to be a rule setter in whatever small form you can be, rather than a rule taker. Because today, value and power is not in execution in the economic system, it is in the governance of the economic system. Take a simple example of Uber. The execution is done by the driver, and the driver is doing a is in a commodity market. The governance is done by Uber's algorithms and the data scientists designing that algorithm. And so even as the driver's wages go down, the data scientists' salaries go up, because all the value shifts to governance. So the difference today is not between capitalists and labor class. The difference is between rule setters and rule takers. So no matter what industry you are in, as a small company, even if you are disadvantaged on execution and scale, try to ensure that you are not disadvantaged on governance and rule setting.
Thank you very much. Now, when you mentioned the Singapore, you were in 2018, back in 2018, you were working with the Singapore Prime Minister's office, and you were working on helping them to think through the question of how Singapore will retain a very strong position in a world where trade increasingly doesn't flow through the port but becomes digital. You mentioned that Eastern Europe economies face a similar set of dilemmas today, and please explain us how, or use the Serbia as example, and explain us how you see that the smaller countries are in the same position today.
Absolutely. I mean, all of you are economists, all of you are experts on the Serbian economy, much more than me, but coming at it from the outside, if I see it from an external viewer's perspective, I see that, you know, Serbia's economic play has very often been about creating a stable production system at a cheap cost, which plugs into European supply chains and creates a labor arbitrage, an execution arbitrage, if you will. And two things are changing from that model. The first is that that model was based on a stable production system with a stable supply chain. And the second was based on the fact that most value is created by labor. Now, both of those things are changing. Supply chains are more uncertain than ever. They are being reorganized around new energy constraints, around new compliance constraints. So there's uncertainty on the supply chain structure, if you will. And then there is a constantly shifting, advantage or disadvantage on the labor arbitrage aspect of it, because just arbitrage on labor-based execution is no longer sufficient. Today we have some forms of AI. Over the next 10 years, we will have many more forms of AI taking over many more forms of labor advantages away from humans. So I'll essentially, make 2 or 3 key points over here. The first is that when we think about making investments in such an environment where the demand side, which is the nature of the supply chain into which we are plugging, is highly uncertain, not just uncertain operationally, but uncertain in its structure. It's structurally uncertain. At the same time, the cost advantage associated with labor or skill, any form of skilled labor, is dramatically dropping. We need to be very careful about where we make investments, because we could make really large investments into a certain kind of energy infrastructure, a certain kind of factory infrastructure, and very soon realize that because technology is shifting, the labor advantage goes away. At the same time, because supply chains are changing, the demand profile changes. So we need to be very careful, first of all, about how we make commitments. And in order to create a stable mechanism where these commitments can be credibly made, I would propose 2 different things. One is how we manage policy inside the country. Now, this is not specific to Serbia. This is what I advise every single government that I work with. Traditional industry boundary-based policy is going away because the traditional industry boundary logic no longer applies, especially with AI. You can take knowledge work capability from one industry and move it to another industry because the model is portable. Even if in the past the humans were not, the model is fully portable. And so the industry boundary logic no longer applies as such. So policy should also not apply to industries as much as it should apply to capabilities, because capabilities can now move across industry boundaries. The value of capabilities can constantly change because if a capability becomes commoditized by AI, it suddenly loses value, and some other capabilities may gain value. So most innovation over the next 5 to 7 years is going to be what I believe is recombinant innovation. You combine capabilities across industries to solve new problems for your customers. And that is why policy cannot be tied to industry boundaries. It has to be tied to managing specific forms of capabilities. So that's one implication of this shifting profile. But the second implication is how we plug into global supply chains, European supply chains. And this is similar to what I advise the Singapore government in terms of how to plug into global trade. And that is that plugging in with an execution advantage is no longer enough. You have to plug in with a governance advantage. You have to say that we can set the rules on these activities in the supply chain because we are fundamentally better at those activities. So you cannot plug into the supply chain saying, we're going to provide this cheaper for you. You can plug in saying that we can verify this better, we can manage compliance better, we can manage compliance upstream so that downstream checks do not need to happen and downstream costs do not need to be incurred. And so what you're really selling is the compliance and governance rather than the cheap execution. So those are the three key points that I would make. Because of the changing demand profile and the supply profile, be very careful about your commitments, manage your capabilities, and ensure that you are aligned around compliance and governance and rule setting in whatever small capacity that you can take on.
In continuation to that question, there is one industry branch which is always somehow difficult because all of the projects are over the budget 100%. The projects are finished with huge delays. So this is a construction industry. So you explained how you would do it with the Serbia, or smaller country. Tell us a little bit how you would then recommend that construction industry gets the value from reshuffling.
Yeah, thanks for that question. I've been doing a lot of work in the construction industry over the last 2 years because the impact of AI is especially interesting in construction. I recently wrote an article in the Harvard Business Review about this, taking the example of the construction industry. And the problem is that very often when we talk about AI in the construction industry, people come in and say, well, it's very physical, it's very human intensive, robots are not going to replace the construction workers. I'm going to say this again, robots are not the only aspect of AI, and they're actually the most distracting aspect of AI. The most important aspect of AI is not what we see, it's the fact that certain things that could not be achieved in the past can now be achieved because they can be better organized, better managed once you have a model that is trained on the world's knowledge. That is the secret superpower of AI. And the way it applies to construction is essentially this. If you think about any construction project, you move from the customer specifying the intent to the design phase, the planning phase, the procurement, and then the construction, and then finally, completion of the building, and then the operations. In this whole cycle, from architecture to engineering to construction, what you see very often is that what the customer intended at the beginning is not actually getting done towards the end. And because of that, there is rework, there is issue resolution, there is reorientation of processes, there's costly fixes towards the end. And all of that happens because there's a coordination failure. What the customer said was not translated well. Even if it was translated well by the designers, it was not understood well by the engineers or by the constructors. And at every point, information is lost because you design in a 3D model, then you convert it into a PDF, then you convert it into a plan. So you're constantly losing information and intent. Now, in the past, the challenge, especially with this, was that every single part of the construction life cycle was managed by a different discipline. So you had designers, architects, engineers, contractors. Each of them had different discipline specific tools. And what they did in their tool was very specialized to their discipline. So there was very little coordination between them. The tools did not talk to each other. The disciplines did not talk too much to each other. Today, what we're seeing with AI is something very interesting, and it is what I call coordination without consensus. What I mean by that is in the past, if you wanted different tools and different processes to work together, they had to agree on a common standard, and so they would then start exchanging information with each other, and the workflow would be managed by that. Today, you can use AI, and there are new players. There's a company called Trunk Tools that I talk about, which essentially these players take the project outputs, the design files, the PDFs, the construction schedules, and they work across all of these different outputs to create a full picture of a construction project and manage that end to end in a coordinated way. And essentially, the starting point of it is something like a chat GPT for construction, where you can just ask it any question, and because it is managing all the different files, similar to the travel example I gave earlier, but because it's managing all these different files, it can give you answers about what's the state of the construction project and how can different issues be managed. But going forward, if this becomes the interface where the owner or the project manager can make the decisions, then eventually all the tools will have to integrate with it and provide even better information. So even though you start with coordination without consensus, you can eventually enforce that consensus as the tools start integrating with this layer. And when that happens, you can now start seeing across the different fragmented pieces. And I think that is where the biggest advantage of construction now comes in, because today there are three kinds of problems that happen in construction that break down because of this coordination. The first is what the owner specified in their intent is not translated into execution. The second is that as work moves, it keeps falling out of alignment. So issues are discovered and they have to be fixed later on. And the third is there's no clarity on when the work was actually done, and hence when money can be released. And all these three problems can be solved, especially because if you have this layer where the AI is monitoring the work end to end, you don't need issues to come in. You can resolve them before they come in, because you can simulate downstream effects. You can accordingly guide what kinds of decisions should be made. Similarly, because you can track the work end to end, you can then ensure that it matches the intent. And as soon as the work is finished based on the intent, the payment can be executed. So that's, very tactically, that's how construction is now beginning to change. And I think it's a very powerful point in time where we'll start seeing construction become more coordinated and projects unlocking much more value than before.
Thank you, Sanjit. Let me come to another question. You touched it slightly before when you talked about the knowledge economy and actually how knowledge businesses change because of AI. I believe all of us here also in the audience is reading in the news, discussing sometimes how AI might take over your job or actually remove your job in the near future. I understood you have a bit different view here, because you're saying that every single job is creating a different type of value and actually works in a different way in the system. Can you share your view? Is there a need to be, afraid of AI taking over our jobs?
That's the central question that is there in everybody's mind. And I'll just say this. Today, people talk about it in two extremes. There's one group that says AI will take away our jobs. There's another group will say that says that AI will make us better at our jobs, and we will make much more, we will create much more output. And it just assumes that, there's one side which is negative, one side that's positive. AI is either substituting us or complementing us. But actually this, the simple model of substitution versus complementarity is not the right way to look at how value is actually created. I believe that AI will have many negative effects and it will have many positive effects, but not because of substitution and complementarity. It's because technology or any change in capability changes the nature of value creation by doing three things specifically. The first is it commoditizes previous forms of value and moves value somewhere else. So a simple example in the case of the knowledge economy is certain forms of knowledge work will lose value. For example, in a lot of industries, you see language translation is now automated. So the job of the language translation person, especially when it comes to translating documents, starts losing value. And in that case, it becomes much more difficult to capture that value when you're competing with the machine. At the same time, even in translation, the same word can mean different things given the end context. So translating to context is still a constraint. And where that constraint becomes highly important, especially if you're in a high stakes negotiation, the context becomes very important. So where that constraint becomes important, that particular tasks and skills still holds value. So my problem with this whole AI will take your job, someone using AI will, is that we assume that jobs are simply tasks, and when machines can do it better than us, the job goes away. It's not quite as simple as that. The first thing, as I mentioned, is that the reason jobs change is because what contains value and what does not contain value, which activities hold value, which activities become commoditized, that balance changes. So if you are left holding on to activities which are becoming commoditized, you are entering a commodity market. Even if your job remains, you will not be able to charge a good amount of money for it. A simple example, again, I gave the Uber example. In the past, a driver was doing both knowledge work. He was navigating the city, which involved knowledge work, and he was doing physical work, which is driving the car. Today, he's not doing knowledge work. He's only doing physical work. And hence, the premium associated with the knowledge work has moved from the driver to Uber, and the part left with the driver has become commoditized. The same thing will increasingly happen in more forms of knowledge work. So first, keep a lookout for commoditization and value migration. The second thing is that with AI, it's not just our jobs that get affected. We have to remember that our jobs perform a certain function in the economy. And so if the nature of value creation in the larger economy changes, if the logic of competition changes, then our jobs have to change in response to that, not because AI took our job or somebody else who was using AI better than us took our job, but because the logic of the job no longer applies. The logic of the job has to change. With that, the skills that were valued in the past may no longer be valued. I take the example of the word processor. We talk about the job of a typist. 50 years back, there used to be a job of a typist, and we used to think that if you think of the job of a typist, you would think that the job existed because the person could type. But when the word processor was invented, it did not take away typing from the humans. It did not automate typing. We as humans still type. But the impact of the word processor was that the value of high-skilled typing went away. High-skill, high-quality typing was no longer valued. Because before the word processor, the cost of editing a document was very high. So anybody who could do high-quality typing, they were paid well to avoid that cost. The moment the cost of editing the document went to zero, the skill of high quality typing was no longer valued. And that's what's increasingly going to happen in knowledge work as well. So keep a view on what are the factors that create a logic for your job, and are those factors still going to hold true in the future? The final thing to keep in mind is that our jobs are really about what we make of the various capabilities available to us. And especially at a time when the logic of the economic system and the economy is constantly changing, it is up to us to have the agency to keep changing the logic of our job. I'll give another example over here to make a case for this, which I believe is, I find this a very compelling way to think about reimagining your job. So, a magician, in a way, a magician is a knowledge worker. And the way a magician used to capture value was to learn a skill learn a trick and keep that trick secret. As long as the trick was secret, they could monetize the sense of wonder, because they were really monetizing not so much the performance, but the sense of wonder, the sense of magic they were creating. And that was tied to the ability to keep the trick secret. Now, with the arrival of the internet, people started deconstructing tricks and opening it up on YouTube. So soon, the shelf life of a trick collapsed. Even if you spent years learning a trick, it could immediately be deconstructed. So today, magicians do not try to learn new tricks. They take existing tricks, they use new kinds of spectacle, new types of special effects, and they use new storytelling, new elements of story. And combining all of those things, they now recreate that sense of wonder in the customer. And so you cannot keep competing by learning new skills when AI is constantly collapsing the value of skills to zero. If you are in an industry where AI is constantly collapsing the value of those skills, reimagine your job by combining new things and again thinking about what does the customer care about. Just like the magician realized the value was not in the skill, but in monetizing the sense of wonder in the customer. Think about what does your customer care about and how can you then reimagine your job. So think about these things. These are not things we normally think about when we think about AI's impact on the task, but really if you think about your job and the role it plays in the economy, you'll realize that it's not about the tasks in the job, it's about where is value sitting, what is the logic of my job, and how can I reimagine it when the logic of the industry changes?
Cool. Thank you, Sanjit. A short follow-up on your example of the Uber case. And you're actually saying that Uber is now preparing the knowledge, actually are taking those additional values the Uber driver or the taxi driver, transport driver was adding before. When you now follow the latest developments that, okay, the platform is organizing data, decisions where the driver needs to go, and when we in the near future maybe have the self-driving cars or trucks, do you see a chance for the driver to sustain in his job without upscaling his skill set?
I don't think upskilling is the solution for the driver at all. The driver is already skilled and is not being paid for his skill enough. If you really look at a lot of things that the driver does, which create value but are not rewarded because they are not measured by the algorithm. So it's really important to understand, are you in a market where your work is constantly being measured and managed by an algorithm? And the more we get into an AI based world, the more our work will be constantly measured. Because when we, for instance, when we use AI in our work, we are it's automatically measurable in terms of how our tasks and our approach to work is changing around the usage of these tools. If I go back to the Uber example, the challenge today is not just the fact that the drivers are not skilled and they should be skilled further. I think the drivers are skilled very well. The challenge is twofold. The first is that many things that create value, if you take Uber, the passenger side, where we get into a car and we go from a point A to a point B, the driver does not just take us from point A to point B. They also create a good ambience in the car. They may be polite to us. All of that may have value. And today that value is not rewarded in any specific way. So one thing is that because of the way, Uber is structured as an algorithmic system where the market clearing price is achieved and a liquid market is achieved, you do not value all these other non-measurable points of value. The second thing, and this becomes even more clear with something like Uber Freight, which is the Uber's logistics arm, where the driver has to do not just smiling at the customer, but he has to handle corner cases. If a particular gate at a particular warehouse is locked, how does he manage that? Or if he has to meet a certain deadline but is stopped on the way for a certain check, how does he ensure that he manages that deadline? All of those things are not tracked and rewarded. Instead, whatever is tracked by the algorithm is rewarded. So that's one of the key challenges with an algorithmically managed market. You end up on a race to the bottom, and all the value goes to the market maker. And in the case of Uber and Google Maps, also the key source of knowledge, which is navigation. Navigation is the key source of knowledge because of which the market becomes commoditized once you remove the knowledge and the skill from the market. So the challenge is until you keep removing the skill that was monetizable in the past and you do not reward the new skill except that which is fully commoditizable, no amount of skilling on the part of the worker will help. So the only way to solve this is to create better ways to think about how this market is designed and how it's regulated, but also at a at an individual worker level, not get trapped inside algorithmic markets. Think about how else you can apply your skills outside an algorithmic market.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you. Let me come to an industry where we are quite active, the banking industry. And there are many initiatives around automation, and you touched base before that AI is not only automation. But you're also describing that the traditional banks are mainly around products and branches with a bit of digitalization. So there are other players as well, like Ant Financial, which is built around algorithms which are deciding independently about data and user graphs, but also about full execution of their partner and ecosystem. Now, again, maybe insights for me in advising or working with my banking partners and clients. How would you, or which steps would you see for a mid-sized bank to leverage on AI? What would maybe be like the low-hanging fruit and where the journey can go?
Well, so there are two or three different things over here. If you want only the low-hanging fruit, I would say that it will come through automation, because automation is simplest to execute and you will immediately see some benefits. But if you want to have a medium-term or a longer-term impact on the bank, the automation benefits will get competed away. You will end up in a commoditized play because everybody will do the same automations. What AI allows us to do is to rethink how the banking logic is structured. Because what I mean by that is the logic of banking is structured around channels and around customers and around products. So a specific product tied to a specific channel, serving a specific customer, all the workflows are structured around those three variables. Whereas when you really think of the new examples like Ant Financial that you're talking about, when you really think of any player that is truly AI native, the way their model is typically structured is that the unit of analysis is not a product or a channel. The unit of analysis is a customer context or a customer situation and a specific way to serve the customer in that situation, whether it is a specific, an existing product or just a capability that can be applied to a particular situation. So in most cases, what this really means is that you have to redesign the bank away from the logic of channels and products. You have to, first of all, think about your products in terms of different capabilities. With AI, this becomes much more easy because today, a lot of customer serving logic is created at the channel level. Every channel creates its own logic, manages it in its own workflow. There are standard operating procedures. There are, checklists. All of that is very channel specific. The different channels don't talk to each other. But with AI, you can create a bank-wide customer serving logic where you extract individual capabilities from products and try to see which of these capabilities can be standardized across different products, which of the decisions that are being made at individual channels, how can those decisions be split and some of them be made centrally so that you have a standardized decision logic and only some parts of it are remain channel specific. And once that happens, this is what I call, in my book, I describe this as unbundling and rebundling. Today, our products and channels are structured on a certain bundling logic. It bundles a certain set of capabilities to a certain set of customer problems. But if customers come in with highly specific problems which are, which cannot be solved by a bundle, or with an existing product or channel, you are unable to solve it, which is why you need to unbundle the product and the channel. You need to unbundle the product into capabilities. You need to unbundle the channel into the decisions that are being made and move some of them centrally and prior, and then rethink how you can solve the different customer problems on this basis. So this is really the logic of a graph-based approach that the AI native players are increasingly applying. And this is clearly not a low-hanging fruit, not a short-term win. So I would say that the way to achieve this is that as you modernize the bank, think about two things. Continue doing the automations, but ensure that the automations are not local automations. Every time you automate something, say you automate customer onboarding or you automate loan origination, in each of these workflows, identify what are the capabilities which can be applied to other workflows and create a shared capability stack where you have a separate team working on the capability stack, and the individual workflow owners can work with that team to design these capabilities so that they can be leveraged across the entire bank. And the key to really achieving this new logic of the bank is to create this capability stack and gradually move from short-term automation value that you create to creating medium-term capabilities value in the stack, and then long-term new products and new innovations value based on these capabilities. So you have to balance these three things together if you want to transform your bank for the age of AI.
Thank you very much. We have only time to thank you for being with us tonight, to keep you safe, please safe over there and stay safe. And we are looking forward to see you soon in Serbia, like we agreed that we will do something and somehow recover this that you were not with us. We have to do a good job then when you come here that we will get all of this what we were planning to do now. Thank you very much. Keep safe there, you and your family, and we are looking forward to talk to you very soon.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. I look forward to it as well.
Thank you, Sanjit. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you.
Hvala svima što ste bili i što ste saslušali sve ovo. Nadam se da je nešto od ovoga će pomoći i vama. Želim vam lepo veče i hvala vam puno. Doviđenja.